The good news tonight is that Alligator Alcatraz is closing down. Donald Trump's Florida invention for delivering cruel and unusual punishment to people detained in his immigration roundups could not even make it halfway through Donald Trump's presidential term. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was stuck with issuing the surrender statement announcing that the prison camp that he and Donald Trump championed in the Everglades is going out of business. Two federal judges stood up to Donald Trump today and said, no, you cannot prevent voting by mail in the United States. And the Trump slush fund to pay January 6th criminals who tried to overthrow the presidential election in a conspiracy against the United States by attacking the United States Capitol for Donald Trump will be investigated by a federal judge. Meanwhile, the cowardly lions of the Senate did it again. They bowed in abject terror to the madness of Donald Trump. When the honorable former Republican leader of the United States Senate and former Republican presidential nominee Bob Dole died at the age of 98 in 2021, John McCain's widow, Cindy McCain, said, "Rest in peace, Bob Dole. You are the last of the lions of the Senate." The lions of the Senate is an old term used to refer to the admired, powerful, long-serving, most influential senators. And at Democrat Ted Kennedy's 2009 funeral in Boston, President Obama called him a lion of the Senate. And when Republican Senator and former Republican presidential nominee John McCain died in 2018, Senator Susan Collins said, "The lions of the Senate are gone. It is very sad." It is very sad. I admired Bob Dole as a senator who took his oath of office seriously, as a strategist, even though most of his strategies were trying to defeat what we were trying to accomplish when I was working on the Democratic staff of the United States Senate. And I considered Bob Dole and his chief of staff, Sheila Burke, to be friends of mine. And I miss being able to admire and respect senators whose politics were opposed to mine. But Susan Collins was right. They're gone. And what is left is the most pathetic collection of cowardly lions ever to have earned the job titled United States Senator. 24 hours ago at this hour, I was reporting to you Republican Senator Bill Cassidy's defiance of Donald Trump, standing up at a closed meeting of Republican senators and Donald Trump in a large conference room just off the Senate floor, where the suddenly brave Bill Cassidy got in what the New York Times called a shouting match with Donald Trump about Donald Trump's war in Iran. Donald Trump demanded to know why 4 Republican senators could have voted for a war powers resolution pushed by Chuck Schumer that would stop Donald Trump's power to wage war in Iran. And Bill Cassidy was one of those 4 Republicans who helped pass that with votes of the Democrats. And that's what led to that shouting match. But now we know that 68-year-old Senator Bill Cassidy, who is being forced out of office because Donald Trump defeated him in his Senate Republican re-election primary with a Trump-endorsed candidate, must continue to have high hopes of earning a Washington income for the next, 10 or more years. Like all former senators, Bill Cassidy will have Senate floor privileges for the rest of his life. That makes him an instantly valuable lobbyist in Washington, as too many former senators immediately become. It means that lobbyist Bill Cassidy can not only chase his old friends down in their offices to lobby them on behalf of giant, high-paying corporations, he can actually follow them right onto the Senate floor, unlike those lobbyists who are not former senators, those less valuable lobbyists. Former senators are worth a lot of money in the lobbying business in Washington, but not if they are shunned by their own party, which Bill Cassidy obviously fears now. And so next year, if Bill Cassidy remains a known enemy of Donald Trump, he would not be hired as a lobbyist by anyone in Washington. And of course, there's also the possibility of Bill Cassidy falling asleep these nights dreaming of becoming President J.D. Vance's Secretary of Health and Human Services in the next administration. And to do that, Bill Cassidy would need to have a record of support for Donald Trump, not a record of a Senate troublemaker for Donald Trump. And so, during this program last night, Bill Cassidy switched his vote on another procedural vote on Donald Trump's war in Iran, not a substantive vote, just a procedural vote, a vote that actually has no actual meaning other than to record Bill Cassidy is now voting in favor of Donald Trump's war. Donald Trump came up to the Senate yesterday, went into the Republican senators' luncheon, yelled at all of them, and got two of them to switch their votes on a meaningless procedural vote that Republican Majority Leader John Thune was then able to put before the Senate around 10:30 p.m. last night and then claim that Donald Trump won a vote in favor of the war in Iran, a procedural vote that has no meaning. And Bill Cassidy, who said yesterday he could not be bullied by Donald Trump, was successfully bullied by Donald Trump into switching his vote, as was Rand Paul, the faux libertarian member of the Senate, who now thinks Donald Trump should be allowed a free hand in waging a foreign war without congressional authorization, something Rand Paul did not think until Donald Trump yelled at him yesterday. These are the cowardly lions. And they are succumbing to the most cowardly lion of all the Republican cowardly lions, Donald Trump himself. The cowardly lions all sat there yesterday letting Donald Trump yell at them while they were trying to eat the luncheon sandwiches brought into the room from the Senate dining room. And when Donald Trump called Senator Lisa Murkowski, quote, a horrible person, not one of those men or women, not one of those disgraceful, cowardly lions dared to rise and say to Donald Trump, no, she is not. No, Lisa Murkowski is not a horrible person. They couldn't even bring themselves to say that. That couldn't possibly happen in the same luncheon that the Democratic senators have in the same kind of room off the Senate floor. No one has ever walked into that Democratic luncheon and called any Democratic senator in that room a horrible person, and no one would ever be allowed to. That kind of spineless cowardice exists only on the Republican side of the United States Senate. It has never been demonstrated on the Democratic side of the United States Senate in the Senate's history. Bill Cassidy told an interviewer that he was so terrified of Donald Trump in that room that he passed a note to Donald Trump's incompetent Iran negotiator, Steve Witkoff, in that room, telling Steve Witkoff that he, Senator Cassidy, would be willing to change his vote if Steve Witkoff would just grant him a briefing on what's going on in Iran. And so Bill Cassidy went up to the White House, got a briefing from a real estate developer, came back and switched his vote, thereby preserving a potential future for Bill Cassidy in Washington as a lobbyist or as a future member of a Republican administration after Donald Trump has driven him out of the United States Senate.
But you had also said the American people need that information. So the American people aren't getting those public hearings and briefings.
So last night when I asked about that in my briefing, they said right now the negotiations are delicate. And they could collapse if they're not nursed along in the appropriate way. I can accept that.
Nursed along in the appropriate way? Delicate? That morning, Donald Trump nursed along the negotiations with one of his typically unhinged public threats to end the negotiations, saying that if what he was hearing about the negotiations was false information, quote, negotiations would end immediately. That's nursing along the negotiations. And the day before that, Donald Trump nursed along the negotiations this way. So I have Iran on the ropes, ready to go down for the fall, willing to give us practically anything, and for the first time in decades, respecting the hell out of the United States and its president, me, nursing along the negotiations. Bill Cassidy sits there and insults the intelligence of everyone in Louisiana who ever cast a vote for him. He sits there and lies to this country that these negotiations are being delicately nursed along by Donald Trump's White House that secretly convinced him to switch his vote by telling him secret information of how they're nursing it along. In a social media post about Bill Cassidy's vote against Donald Trump's warrant, Donald Trump called Bill Cassidy a loser. Donald Trump's favorite word, a loser. And then Bill Cassidy proved Donald Trump was right about that. Here's what Donald Trump said last night while Bill Cassidy was being briefed in the White House.
Last week, we signed a historic agreement to end the conflict with Iran, fully open the Strait of Hormuz, and accomplish what no president has ever been able to accomplish before. Iran will never have a nuclear weapon.
Was that in Bill Cassidy's briefing? Because that is an abject lie. President Obama reached an agreement with Iran in which Iran promised never to seek, acquire, or develop a nuclear weapon, and they said that in writing. Secretary of State John Kerry negotiated that agreement with Iran, and so yes, the president has been able to accomplish that before and accomplish it without a war. And last night, I invited John Kerry on this program when he was a guest here to say, "I told you so." And he proved himself once again to be a bigger person than I am. What is it like for you now when you see Donald Trump desperately trying to negotiate the deal that you negotiated, desperately trying to claw back to get to the point that you got to? You're not the "I told you so" type. That's not the kind of phrase you would use, but that's certainly the posture we all think you have a right to be sitting in tonight.
Well, Lawrence, let me just say to you that I think that what really needs to be focused on here is not that or any kind of personal pieces here. In my judgment, I mean, there's no place for the personal here. This is really a matter of what's good diplomacy, what's good for the United States, what's good outcome.
There's a lion of the Senate. John Kerry served 28 years in the United States Senate. That's the way it used to be. You don't make it personal. That is what decency looks like. That is what honor sounds like. There's no place for the personal here. That's what John Kerry said when I invited him to get personal about Donald Trump lying about him for years and what he accomplished as Secretary of State in his nuclear agreement with Iran. There's no place for the personal. That's what he told me. Washington used to be filled with people like John Kerry. The United States Senate used to be mostly filled with people like John Kerry, who would never publicly indulge their personal feelings when discussing or voting on what they thought was best for America. And then came Donald Trump, who can walk into a closed room with Republican senators, call Lisa Murkowski a horrible person, and they all sit there in pathetic, cowardly silence, with one of them going out later and telling the press that Donald Trump was completely justified in being so angry at them. Because for Donald Trump, there is nothing but the personal. And for the Republicans who have put the United States Senate in Donald Trump's service, there is nothing but living the rest of their lives in disgrace. Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. He's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the Senate Appropriations Committee. Senator Van Hollen, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Bill Cassidy apparently got a secret briefing that's filled with all sorts of good news that no one else in the Senate is allowed to know.
Well, Lawrence, you're right that the groveling and appeasement knows no bottom anymore in the United States Senate. We used to have a Republican Party where we had vigorous differences with the Democrats on all sorts of issues, but at least they took their responsibilities as senators seriously. In other words, as a separate branch of government, an Article I branch of government. And you would never be able to see a president come down and just insult and berate members of their own party without anybody sticking up for their members or the Constitution. And that's what we have here. And so after that lunch, as you said, Senator Cassidy and others reversed their votes from just the previous few days, a vote that they had cast making clear that this war needs to come to an end, this illegal war. And that's why, for the first time in history, we passed a concurrent joint resolution, the same resolution that passed the House, calling for an end of the war. And yet, after that lunch and that so-called briefing, you saw Senator Cassidy, unfortunately, switch his vote. It is a very sad sign of the times.
So Donald Trump always tells the lie that no one else has ever been able to achieve a pledge from Iran not to develop nuclear weapons. Of course, he hasn't even achieved it yet. He just has a memo saying they might agree to that later. John Kerry and Barack Obama did achieve exactly that. It was working. As Secretary Kerry explained last night, the enforcement mechanisms were working completely. But one thing that John Kerry and Barack Obama did not achieve, that Donald Trump apparently is trying to achieve, is a massive several $100 billion payoff to Iran. If something like that were to come to the United States Senate, could it possibly pass?
So, Lawrence, let's unpack a couple things here. The first issue is that this war was a complete disaster for the United States. I mean, Donald Trump put our country in a terrible position. We've had 14 Americans killed, hundreds injured, thousands of civilians. We just saw Moody's Analytics say that the cost of the war to the country is over $135 billion. So my view is this war needs to come to an end. Now, we still don't know what form the nuclear part of these discussions will take, because those have not really started in earnest. But I do believe we need to put an end to this war, because there's no good way to end a bad war. Let me put it that way. Donald Trump has hurt this country, and now we just need to end it, because when you're digging yourself a hole, you need to stop digging.
We've seen now new economic data indicating that the inflation is not being driven just by the increase in oil prices because of Donald Trump's war, but there's the fundamental structure of the economy has been generating this inflation, which means it's not going to come down. Inflation is not going to be aiming down to tolerable levels just because the oil starts to flow.
Well, that's right. And of course, this is why President Trump all of a sudden says that he loves inflation, because he's been creating the inflation. And, you know, one of the very few truths that Donald Trump has said, because as you know, they're few and far between, was when he admitted to the country that he doesn't think about the country's financial situation. And that's obviously true. I mean, look, he just threw a stick of dynamite into a bill to bring down housing costs in order to try to rig the midterm elections. And so Donald Trump has everything on his mind when it comes to enriching himself and his family and his billionaire buddies. But as you just said, when it comes to inflation, he doesn't give a damn. He just keeps pushing it up and up and up, including, as we know, with his across-the-board tariffs before his reckless war.
Mm-hmm. Senator Chris Van Hollen, thank you very much for starting off our coverage tonight.
It's good to be with you, Lawrence.
And coming up, 2 federal judges today said no to Donald Trump, one on mail-in voting and another on Donald Trump's slush fund for criminals who attacked the Capitol. The top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, Congressman Jamie Raskin, who will be the chairman of that committee if the Democrats win the House and unable to investigate all of these things, will join us next. A federal judge in Massachusetts today found Donald Trump's executive order to reduce and control and limit, in many cases, and eliminate, in many cases, voting by mail is unconstitutional. U.S. District Court Judge Indira Talwani sided with Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Campbell, 22 other states, and the District of Columbia, saying that Donald Trump, who casts mail-in votes himself, was interfering with states' mail voting systems. Judge Talwani wrote in her 37-page opinion, the Constitution does not grant the president any specific powers over elections, underlining the words does not. Judge Talwani continues, quote, the executive order attempts to intimidate local election officials to use the necessarily incomplete confirmed citizenship lists as a resource, lest they face criminal prosecution. Such efforts fall outside the president's Article 2 and otherwise delegated authority. No law enacted by Congress delegates authority to control mail-in voting to the United States Postal Service. The states alone determine voter eligibility requirements, subject only to the outer limits of the Constitution. Yesterday, a federal judge in Virginia said that a lawsuit filed against Donald Trump's $1.776 billion slush fund to pay criminals who attacked the Capitol on January 6th can proceed. U.S. District Judge Leonie Brinkema said that the Trump Justice Department officials were given the opportunity to end the lawsuit, writing, quote, on June 12, 2026, defendants were offered the opportunity to end this litigation by filing written declarations under the penalty of perjury, affirming that they will not take any action to create or operate the anti-weaponization fund, and that the fund will not proceed in any manner or under any other name. Instead of filing those declarations, defendants have filed a notice declining to provide such assurances under the penalty of perjury, claiming that such declarations are unnecessary and the compelled testimony of senior officials from the executive branch implicates serious separation of powers concerns. The judge continued saying, on the record before this court, the President and Acting Attorney General Blanche's continued interest in compensating alleged victims of the alleged government weaponization, the defendant's unwillingness to provide declarations under the penalty of perjury, and the Acting Attorney General Blanche's refusal to rescind the May 18, 2026 memo, which set up the structure of the fund, all support conclusion that this civil action is not moot. Joining us now is Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee and a constitutional law professor. Let's begin with what seems like a pretty simple constitutional law question. How much control of elections does the Constitution grant to the President of the United States?
Zero, as Judge Talwani said. The Constitution vests that power in the states, and then there's complementary or supplementary power in Congress to alter the time, place, and manner of elections under certain conditions. But neither the states nor the Congress gave any power to the president to do it. So the federal court has properly ruled this was nothing but an outrageous power grab by the president, and he's got to stay in his lane. His job is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed, not rewritten and thwarted.
The states who got together and formed the United States of America by ratifying the Constitution would never have voted to ratify the Constitution if it said the president can control elections. They were already having elections in their states for their state governments.
Right. And when we, the people, created the Constitution, we were very clear that the president had no role in controlling congressional elections or, of course, presidential elections, which is why President Trump essentially had to apply all of that coercive leverage and pressure on Mike Pence to try to get him to engage in the political coup in 2020. And of course, Pence stood up for the Constitution against the president. But that's another episode demonstrating that Donald Trump tries to interfere in a way that he has no constitutional place being involved in at all.
So we have a judge now basically allowing what will be a investigation of the Trump slush fund concept and possibly ongoing Trump slush fund plan. What can you do in Congress about it?
Well, we've got a discharge petition, and as you know, we've passed a number of discharge petitions. It used to be those things were extremely rare, but now we're governing by discharge petition because the Republicans can't do anything by themselves, but the Democrats, if we can get enough Republicans to come along with us, can stop nonsense like this. So we need 6 Republicans to join us in order to bring legislation to the floor to permanently stop the $1.776 billion political slush fund that Trump tried to deal to himself, as well as the permanent immunity that he tried to deal himself and his family and his businesses for not just criminal offenses, he got that basically from the Supreme Court, but for civil offenses as well, in the tax field and in all other fields. No federal department or agency can prosecute or investigate any of his crimes or civil violations under this self-dealing settlement that they made. So when we get back in, as soon as the Republicans can get their act together, at least to reopen Congress next week or the following week, who knows when they'll bring us back in, at that point, we are going to be pressing our discharge petition because, you know, Todd Blanche keeps saying we're not moving forward. Well, when my car comes to a stop sign, I'm not moving forward. But 5 seconds later, I'm moving forward. So we need to build this into the law.
So the discharge petition offers voters the opportunity to know if their member of Congress supports the slush fund or opposes the slush fund. And any Republican who doesn't join you in opposing the slush fund will be running for re-election having formally made the choice to support the slush fund.
You've got it. Rhetorically, everybody now seems to be denouncing it, or else they're being silent. I've not heard a single Republican in the House or the Senate affirmatively endorse the idea of creating a $1.8 million slush fund so they can play Who Wants to Be a Mega Millionaire with the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and other, convicted criminals. So now is the time to put your representative to the test. Will your representative actually take a stand and cut off the spigot for money to go out for political slush fund purposes? And remember, Lawrence, that they've already started this process. They gave his disgraced former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, $1.25 million after he'd already lost his case in court. They settled a case that the Department of Justice had already won against Michael Flynn. And then they gave money to Carter Page, and they gave, $5 million to the family of a rioter, and because of her tragic death. But there had been 2 federal investigations saying that the Capitol Police had acted properly and appropriately. So they just want to be able to give money away to Donald Trump's private militia.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
You bet, Lawrence.
And coming up, North Carolina Democratic Senate candidate Roy Cooper, who is running strongly now in that campaign, will join us next. There are 131 days until the November elections, and there is good news in North Carolina for Democrats. The Center for Politics at the University of Virginia has now moved its rating of the North Carolina Senate campaign from a toss-up to leans Democrat. The race is between Democratic Senate nominee Roy Cooper and Trump-backed Republican Michael Whatley. Here is North Carolina's former Democratic governor, Roy Cooper, campaigning for Senate in North Carolina.
We need change in Washington. The people in Washington right now are looking after the billionaires and the corporations, and they're forgetting about the very people they're supposed to represent. And that needs to change. It needs to change this November. I think we all need to look within ourselves as to what we can do to make sure we leave our children and grandchildren a better country. I truly believe that our best days are ahead of us. I believe in the people of North Carolina. I believe in the American people. I believe that you can recreate things often when they're down and make them better than they were before. We can make government more effective and efficient for the taxpayers. We can just bring them some good old North Carolina common sense. And that's what I plan to do.
Joining us now is former North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper. He's the Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate in North Carolina. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Governor. Governor, what is the biggest difference between this campaign and your last winning campaign for governor? How have the issues changed?
Well, right now, Lawrence, people are getting crushed by higher prices, from food to utilities to rent to health care. And the people in Washington, the politicians there, are forgetting about the people. They're paying more attention to their own power. And you can see it in all of these bad policies that are being passed that are championed by my opponent, Michael Whatley, like tariffs on farmers. Pender in Wilson County is getting killed with his fertilizer and equipment costs. Veterans like Tim worried about his VA benefits. Moms like Meredith, who's afraid of healthcare cuts because her daughter has cerebral palsy and is on Medicaid. And we know how Washington is attacking healthcare right now. We just can't have this. We need change. I'm excited about running for office. The people will always be my focus. I will never forget them like the politicians who are there now. We got to change. You can see my policy proposals at roycooper.com. You can also contribute. You can also volunteer to help us. We need your help because we've got to take this seat in North Carolina in order to take back the Senate majority in Washington.
So Donald Trump was scheduled to sign a bipartisan bill for trying to help with the costs of housing, an affordability bill supported by Elizabeth Warren on the Democratic side, supported by most of the Republicans in the Senate, 85 votes in the Senate. Donald Trump refused to sign it because he was mad at the Republicans in the Senate about something unrelated to that bill at all. And so that bill is sitting there unsigned tonight. And Donald Trump reportedly said he doesn't give a crap. He said, I don't give a crap. And I'm cleaning that up a bit. I don't give a crap about the affordability of housing.
And Congress is going home. It's pretty clear that Washington is broken right now. And I will get there and work across the aisle to make sure that we address the cost of living to people. This bill was a good one. It didn't do everything that we wanted, but it certainly helped with rent. It helped make more housing available to people. Clearly, we've got an administration in Washington that's not paying attention to the people of North Carolina. We got to stop it. You're seeing what they will do in order to be able to keep their power. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars here in North Carolina to try to keep me from being elected. We've got to fight back. That's going to happen in every swing state. We can't take anything for granted here. If we're going to take back the legislative branch of government so that we can take back the constitutional authority that the framers intended, we've got to make sure that we get people out to vote and we win these races.
So new reporting in the New York Times shows that the latest inflation data shows a surge in inflation because of Donald Trump's war and the increase in gasoline prices and diesel fuel prices. But the bad news is that underneath all of that, the underlying inflationary trend was also increasing. And that is not going to come down when the price of oil comes down. Are voters expecting in North Carolina a sudden relief for their economic problems if oil starts to flow through the Strait of Hormuz?
No, I think they recognize that there's going to be a long time before they get any benefit from this. My opponent, Michael Whatley, is trying to convince people that prices are down and that we have defeated inflation because he has to continue to ingratiate himself to this president. At the end of the day, the people of North Carolina are not going to buy that. I heard Congressman Raskin talking about Republicans in Congress now aren't supporting the slush fund. Well, I got somebody who's supporting it here in North Carolina, and that's Michael Whatley, because he knows he has to. We don't need a senator in North Carolina who's going to do and say whatever this president tells him to do and say. We need a senator who's going to be independent and who's going to put the total focus on the people. And that's what I'm going to do when I get elected.
Former Governor Roy Cooper, now Senate candidate, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
And coming up, Donald Trump allowed and encouraged Elon Musk to destroy the United States Agency for International Development. And now that an Ebola outbreak is raging, someone in Donald Trump's White House seems to regret that. That's next. After allowing Elon Musk to destroy the United States Agency for International Development, someone in the Trump administration seems to regret that. Yesterday, the White House sent a budget request to Congress asking for new funding to fight the Ebola outbreak in Africa. The Associated Press reports the administration is also requesting $550 million to prevent and detect the Ebola virus in Congo, where an outbreak has killed more than 250 people. Another $800 million would go to provide humanitarian assistance to the region. The Ebola outbreak has now spread out of Africa to France. The French newspaper Le Monde reports France on Wednesday announced its first confirmed case of Ebola identified on its territory, a doctor who had flown back from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is fighting a major outbreak. The case is the first identified outside the African continent during the current outbreak, which has also affected Uganda. UNICEF has also confirmed that global Ebola cases have reached at least 1,000 and that, quote, an estimated 2.95 million children and adolescents aged 18 and under are at a risk from Ebola itself and the breakdown of essential services in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. That breakdown in essential services can be directly linked to Donald Trump and Elon Musk's destruction of the United States Agency for International Development, an act which was described at the time by Bill Gates, whose foundation has done important life-saving work in Africa, as, quote, the world's richest man killing the world's poorest children. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Nicholas Kristof wrote this in a New York Times op-ed after Elon Musk spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper, as he put it last year. He and President Trump scoffed that American humanitarian aid was, in effect, woke nonsense, yet in reality, American humanitarian aid not only saved one life every 10 seconds, but was also safeguarding the world from epidemics. So now we face a rapidly increasing outbreak of Ebola, and the Trump administration is finding that some of the things that went into the wood chipper were the very tools needed to tackle the virus. But Trump's assault on global health has left us in a worse position to combat Ebola. And joining us now is Nicholas Enrich, former acting assistant administrator for global health at the United States Agency for International Development. He is the author of the important book, Into the Wood Chipper, a whistleblower's account of how the Trump administration shredded USAID. Thank you very much for joining us tonight on this crucial and important subject. What would be different in this outbreak if Elon Musk and Donald Trump had not destroyed USAID?
Yeah, I think a lot would be different. outbreak would have likely been detected earlier, and the response would have been profoundly more robust and organized. But it's not just that the DOJ and the Trump administration canceled disease surveillance and the kind of sloppy response that we've seen. Is the trust that's been broken that's made it so difficult to respond. I mean, you can't blame communities for wondering why is the U.S. government showing up now to respond to an Ebola outbreak when last year they walked away from supporting critical programming that was keeping children safe from malnutrition and malaria. And I think what we've seen is that trust has broken down and made it that much more difficult to respond.
It seems like Bill Gates' words about Elon Musk, which were ignored at the time, are finally catching up with him as other people are echoing the points. And Elon Musk now is recently tweeting because of this outbreak, and he said he's defending what he did at USAID by saying the standard applied by DOJ was very simple and easy. Provide contact information for the recipients of aid so that we can confirm it is not fraudulent. The reality is that money was being sent to corrupt politicians under the guise of aid, exclamation point. Is that true?
No, it's absolutely false. And we have seen Elon Musk lie repeatedly, not just about the dismantling of USAID, but specifically about Ebola response. I mean, he said multiple times in February of 2025, when there was an Ebola outbreak happening in Uganda, that he was restarting Ebola response activities, when I can tell you for a fact, since I was there trying to get those particular activities restarted, that that's exactly what was not happening. And in fact, the same day that he said that, his DOJ team was actually finalizing the termination of the very contracts that we would have needed to restart those Ebola activities.
Nicholas Enrich, thank you very much for joining us again tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Nicholas Enrich gets tonight's last word.